Hello, hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're getting back into our series dedicated to foods from the wonderful restaurant scene here in the Bay Area with a shot at a really interesting Mapo Tofu found at Spices 3 in Oakland, California. For those who are not familiar, Spices 3 is a classic unassuming Sichuan Chinese restaurant here in Chinatown that has become a favorite amongst Oakland locals. True to their name, the majority of their menu features the hot and spicy numbing heat that is iconic to Sichuan cuisine, making it particularly popular for those who love spicy foods. More specifically today, we're going to be taking a shot at their Stinky Mapo Tofu, which, as the name implies, is a pretty typical Sichuan Mapo Tofu or spicy ground pork and tofu stir-fry, with the added twist that the tofu included is not your more typical soft tofu, but a Chinese fermented Chou tofu, or more colloquially, Stinky tofu. For those unfamiliar, Chou tofu is a Hong Kong street food classic featuring firm tofu that has been aged in a fermented bean curd, which gives it its uniquely pungent and stinky quality. More typically in Chinese cuisine, you might see this deep fried and served as a small plate with a light sauce on the side in family-style cuisine. For our version today, however, we're going to be skipping that deep fry and instead dropping our Chou tofu straight into our wok fry for an interestingly complex quality to our tofu that you generally would not otherwise come across in a more standard Mapo tofu. Finally, to round this all out, it seemed appropriate to take a shot at our own chili oil today as well, since we are paying homage to Spices 3. So we'll be taking a look at how that stuff is made and, more importantly, if it's worth the effort, since you can absolutely just buy that stuff in a jar. Okay, so let's get into it.
Watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar, strawberries on a summer evening.
Okay, so kicking things off, I'm starting off with our stinky tofu element here first, since this bit is going to require a few days of fermentation. I've got a block of tofu here. I ended up using firm tofu, but you can also use soft or silken tofu too, which would be a little bit more classic. I'm slicing this into cubes, and then over in a separate bowl, I've got my fermented bean curd, which is where all of our fermentation and stinky qualities are gonna come from today. Now, this bit is also a little bit difficult to find if you don't live near a Chinese grocery store, so if that is you, I've also read that you can reproduce this fermentation using shrimp paste brined in salt water. In any case, I'm breaking my bean curd down into a paste and then adding it to about 2 cups of water, or basically enough to make sure that your tofu will be submerged when added. Then I'm rounding this out with 2 tablespoons each of Chinese rice wine or baijiu and rice vinegar for a little bit of sweetness. I'm mixing this all to combine, adding my tofu to the box, covering it up tightly and letting this ferment for at least 12 hours or up to 2 days. As with anything fermented, the longer the better. Next up, we're getting to our Mapo Tofu element, which should be otherwise fairly classic and straightforward. This is our classic 3 aromatic elements to start: 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by 1 tablespoon or about 1 inch of finely minced ginger, and 3 green onions, which we're separating and then setting our whites aside with our aromatics, and then the greens aside for our final finishing garnish. Finally, rounding this all out is about 6 to 8 Thai chilies, which we're de-stemming and then slicing thinly for our chili oil later on. More about this soon. These things are going to have a lot of seeds inside of them, which is particularly important today, so make sure that you capture all of those. Moving on to our sauce element, I'm keeping things fairly simple here because we don't want to overshadow both our Chou tofu as well as our homemade chili oil. This is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce to start, followed by a single tablespoon of brown sugar, and finally 2 tablespoons of Chinese doubanjiang to round this all out with a little bit of extra heat. I'm mixing this all to combine and then setting it aside while we dive into our ground pork next. Now, I say this all the time, so many of you may know, but I actually think that you can make Mapo Tofu with really any kind of mince that you want. Ground turkey is my favorite, but ground beef, ground pork, or ground chicken would also work too. Or if you want to make this vegetarian, you can totally just leave this out entirely too. Today we're going to be using ground pork, which would be the more traditional approach and also what they use at Spices 3, but choose for yourselves accordingly. I'm doing a pretty simple marinade here. This is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and 1 tablespoon of Shaoxing wine to start, followed by half a teaspoon each of white pepper and cornstarch to help keep our mince nice and tender. Then I'm mixing this all to combine, and in a separate bowl, I'm combining 2 tablespoons of cornstarch with water for our cornstarch slurry. Finally, we're circling back to our tofu here a full 48 hours later, which looks more or less the same, but is quite pungent though, and that is actually somehow an understatement. I remember my mom used to say this stuff smells like dirty diapers, which is, yeah, okay. It's gonna be worth it though, I promise. Over on the stove, I've got my wok heating up at medium-low heat here to start. Then I'm adding about 2 tablespoons of Sichuan peppercorn, or the end of the jar apparently. We're giving this a dry toast for about 2 to 3 minutes until it becomes fragrant. This is gonna help us release a lot of those aromatic qualities from our peppercorn today. Then I'm removing this to my mortar and pestle, crushing it into a fine powder, and setting this aside to add at the very end. Back over on the stove, we're getting to our chili oil next. Now, if you want, you can totally skip this step. Lao Gan Ma is a great classic chili oil that we use in a lot of recipes all the time. But if you want to perfect your own chili oil though, venture onward. I'm over medium-low heat in my wok here again. Then I'm adding a 1/4 cup of peanut oil, followed by my Thai chilies and a handful of dried Tianjin peppers. We're letting this go low and slow for about 25 to 30 minutes, tossing occasionally to make sure that nothing starts burning on us. Finally, I'm removing this all from the wok, cranking our range up to high heat now, and then I'm adding 4 tablespoons of peanut oil and, as always, long yao for that nice non-stick surface. Then first up here are my aromatics, our garlic, ginger, and the whites of my green onions going in first. We're tossing this for about 10 to 15 seconds until fragrant, then followed by my ground pork going into the wok. I'm giving this a quick toss until browned and making sure that we don't have any large clumps left behind. Then I'm following this up with my very stinky tofu, our sauce, and my chili oil, which I decided to pass through a sieve. But if you like those flaky crunchy bits of chili in your chili oil though, definitely go ahead and throw that all in. We're letting this braise for about 5 minutes until reduced just a little bit. Then finally, I'm adding my cornstarch slurry to help tighten things up. Then last up, I'm removing this from heat, tossing this all with my Szechuan peppercorn, finishing with the greens of my green onions, and we're ready to eat. Okay, so I've been making Mapo Tofu for a long time. You might remember that it was actually the very first recipe to come out on this channel some time ago. And while I am particularly fond of my grandma's Mapo Tofu and our closest recreation of that, me, this version is good. The chili oil gives a uniquely pervasive form of heat that I don't think I have ever been able to create using any of the jarred stuff, presumably because ours is made from fresh chilies. The dry toast to our Szechuan peppercorns gives the dish a super classic aromatic form of numbing heat that is super iconic to Sichuan cuisine. Then the doubanjiang gives the dish a little bit of an extra nudge in heat without being too overwhelming, and of course the fermentation to our stinky tofu adds a classic fermented umami to the dish that's just a really nostalgic touch for me. Lastly, if you're like me and have made a habit of avoiding Chou tofu because you can't get over the smell, I'll also mention that its unique use in a Mapo Tofu context actually mellows out its pungent quality quite a bit without losing too much of its fermented deliciousness, which is a nice added bonus. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. For those who are new to the channel, this one is part of a larger series that we've been doing that's dedicated to recreating foods from the Oakland Bay Area restaurant scene. So definitely check that series out next if you haven't yet, because there's a lot of these. We'll be cooking through this one live this coming Tuesday at 6:30 PST right here on the YouTube channel. So tune in then and cook along with me if you want. For those who are local to the Bay Area, Spices 3 is located in Oakland, Chinatown on 12th and Webster and is an absolute cornerstone to the neighborhood. So definitely head over there for dinner next if you haven't yet. Also, if you are here in the Bay Area, the Wu Can Cook Fried Rice pop-up will be back at the Hayward Farmers Market this weekend, so swing by and come say hi then if you can. More about that at wucancook.com/eats. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, do some interneting, and I'll see you soon.